Analyse people on site. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Carl Manchester, 2010. How to Analyse People on Site Through the Science of Human Analysis. The 5 Human Types. By Elsie Lincoln Benedict and Ralph Payne Benedict. Printed and bound by the Roycrofters at their shops in East Aurora, New York. Copyright 1921 by Elsie Lincoln Benedict and Ralph Payne. To Durran J. H. Ward, Ph.D., formerly of the Anthropology Department of Harvard University, who, as the discoverer of the 4th human type, has added immeasurably to the world's knowledge of human science. To Raymond H. Lufkin, of Boston, who made the illustrations for this volume scientifically accurate. To the Roycrofters of East Aurora, whose artistic workmanship made it into a thing of beauty. And, last but not least, to Sarah H. Young, of San Francisco, our business manager, whose efficiency correlated all these and placed the finished product in the hands of our students. The authors, New York City, June 1921. Dedicated to our students. Contents. Human Analysis. Chapter 1. The Alimentive Type, the Enjoyer. Chapter 2. The Thoracic Type, the Thriller. Chapter 3. The Muscular Type, the Worker. Chapter 4. The Osseous Type, the Stayer. Chapter 5. The Cerebral Type, the Thinker. Chapter 6. Types that should and should not marry each other. Chapter 7. Vocations for each type. What leading newspapers say about Elsie Lincoln Benedict and her work. Over 50,000 people heard Elsie Lincoln Benedict at the City Auditorium during her 6 weeks lecture engagement in Milwaukee. Milwaukee Leader, April 2nd, 1921. Elsie Lincoln Benedict has a brilliant record. She is like a fresh breath of Colorado ozone. Her ideas are as stimulating as the health-giving breezes of the Rockies. New York Evening Mail, April 16th, 1914. Several hundred people were turned away from the Masonic Temple last night, where Elsie Lincoln Benedict, famous human analyst, spoke on how to analyze people on site. Asked how she could draw and hold a crowd of 3,000 for a lecture, she said, "Because I talk on the one subject on earth in which every individual is most interested, himself." Seattle Times, June 2nd, 1920. Elsie Lincoln Benedict is a woman who has studied deeply under genuine scientists and is demonstrating to them individual types, talents, vocational bents and possibilities. San Francisco Bulletin, January 25th, 1919. It's not how much you know, but what you can do that counts. End of front matter. Preface to How to Analyse People on Site. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Carl Manchester, 2010. How to Analyse People on Site. By Elsie Lincoln Benedict and Ralph Payne Benedict. Human Analysis, the X-ray. Modern science has proved that the fundamental traits of every individual are indelibly stamped in the shape of his body, head, face and hands. An X-ray by which you can read the characteristics of any person on sight. The most essential thing in the world to any individual is to understand himself. The next is to understand the other fellow. For life is largely a problem of running your own car as it was built to be run, plus getting along with the other drivers on the highway. From this book you are going to learn which type of car you are, and the main reasons why you have not been getting the maximum of service out of yourself. Also, you are going to learn the makes of other human cars, and how to get the maximum of cooperation out of them. This cooperation is vital to happiness and success. We come in contact with our fellowmen in all the activities of our lives, and what we get out of life depends, to an astounding degree, on our relations with them. Reaction to environment. The greatest problem facing any organism is successful reaction to its environment. Environment, speaking scientifically, is the sum total of your experiences. In plain United States, this means fitting vocationally, socially, and maritally into the place where you are. If you don't fit, you must move or change your environment to fit you. If you can't change the environment and you won't move, you will become a failure, just as tropical plants fail when transplanted to the Nevada desert. Learn from the sagebrush. But there is something that grows and keeps on growing in the Nevada desert, the sagebrush. It couldn't move away, and it couldn't change its waterless environment, so it did what you and I must do if we expect to succeed. It adapted itself to its environment, and there it stayed much. Human life faces the same alternatives that confront all other forms of life, of adapting itself to the conditions under which it must live, or becoming extinct. You have an advantage over the sagebrush, in that you can move from your city or state or country to another, but after all, that is not much of an advantage. For though you may improve your situation slightly, you will still find that in any civilized country the main elements of your problem are the same. Understand yourself and others. So long as you live in a civilized or thickly populated community, you will still need to understand your own nature and the natures of other people. No matter what you desire of life, other people's aims, ambitions, and activities constitute vital obstructions along your pathway. You will never get far without the cooperation, confidence, and comradeship of other men and women. Primitive problems. It was not always so, and its recentness in human history may account for some of our blindness to this great fact. In primitive times, people saw each other rarely and had much less to do with each other. The human element was then not the chief problem. Their environmental problems had to do with such things as the elements, from cold, darkness, and the ever-present menace of wild beasts, whose flesh was their food, yet who would eat them first, unless they were quick in brain and body. Civilization's changes. But all that is changed. Man has subjugated all other creatures, and now walks the earth, its supreme sovereign. He has discovered and invented and builded, until now we live in skyscrapers, talk around the world without wires, and by pressing a button turn darkness into daylight. Causes of failure. Yet with all our knowledge of the outside world, 99 lives out of every 100 are comparative failures. The reason is plain to every scientific investigator. We have failed to study ourselves in relation to the great environmental problem of today. The stage setting has been changed, but not the play. The game is the same old game. You must adjust and adapt yourself to your environment, or it will destroy you. Mastering his own environment. The cities of today look different from the jungles of our ancestors, and we imagine that because the brain of man overcame the old menaces, no new ones have arisen to take their place. We no longer fear extermination from cold. We turn on the heat. We are not afraid of the vast oceans which held our primitive forebears in thrall, but pass swiftly, safely, and luxuriously over their surfaces. And soon we shall be breakfasting in New York and dining the same evening in San Francisco. Facing new enemies. But in building up this stupendous superstructure of modern civilization, man has brought into being a society so intricate and complex that he now faces the new environmental problem of human relationships. The modern spider's web. Today we depend for life's necessities almost wholly upon the activities of others. The work of thousands of human hands and thousands of human brains lies back of every meal you eat, every journey you take, every book you read, every bed in which you sleep, every telephone conversation, every telegram you receive, every garment you wear. And this fellow man of ours has multiplied, since that dim distant dawn, into almost 2 billion human beings, with at least 1 billion of them after the very things you want, and not a tenth enough to go around. Adapt or die. Who will win? Nature answers for you. She has said with awful and inexorable finality that, whether you are a blade of grass in the Nevada desert or a man in the streets of London, you can win only as you adapt yourself to your environment. Today our environmental problem consists largely of the other fellow. Only those who learn to adapt themselves to their fellows can win great or lasting rewards. Externals indicate internal nature. To do this, it is necessary to better understand our neighbours, to recognize that people differ from each other in their likes and dislikes, traits, talents, tendencies, and capabilities. The combination of these makes each individual's nature. It is not difficult to understand others, for with each group of these traits there always goes its corresponding physical makeup, the externals whereby the internal is invariably indicated. This is true of every species on the globe, and of every subdivision within each species. Significance of size, shape, and structure. All dogs belong to the same species, but there is a great difference between the nature of a St. Bernard and that of a terrier, just as there is a decided difference between the natures of different human beings. But in both instances, the actions, reactions, and habits of each can be accurately anticipated on sight by the shape, size, and structure of the two creatures. Differences in breed. When a terrier comes into the room, you instinctively draw away, unless you want to be jumped at and greeted effusively, but you make no such movement to protect yourself from a St. Bernard, because you read on sight the different natures of these two from their external appearance. You know a rose, a violet, a sunflower, and an orchid, and what perfume you are sure to find in each, by the same method. All are flowers, and all belong to the same species, just as all human beings belong to the same species. But their respective size and shape and structure tell you in advance and on sight what their respective characteristics are. The same is true of all human beings. They differ in certain fundamentals, but always and invariably in accordance with their differences in size, shape, and structure. The instinct of self-preservation. The reason for this is plain. Goaded by the instinct of self-preservation, man, like all other living things, has made heroic efforts to meet the demands of his environment. He has been more successful than any other creature is, and as a result, the most complex organism on the earth. But his most baffling complexities resolve themselves into comparatively simple terms once it is recognized that each internal change brought about by his environment brought with it the corresponding external mechanism without which he could not have survived. Interrelation of body and brain. So today we see man a highly evolved creature who not only acts but thinks and feels. All these thoughts, feelings, and emotions are interrelated. The body and the mind of man are so closely bound together that whatever affects one affects the other. All instantaneous change of mind instantly changes the muscles of the face. A violent thought instantly brings violent bodily movements. Movies and face muscles. The moving picture industry, said to be the third in the world, is based largely on this interrelation. This industry would become extinct if something were to happen to sever the connection between external expressions and the internal nature of men and women. Tells fundamentals. How much do external characteristics tell about a man? They tell with amazing accuracy all the basic fundamental principal traits of his nature. The size, shape and structure of a man's body tell more important facts about his real self, what he thinks and what he does, than the average mother ever knows about her own child. Learning to read. If this sounds impossible, if the seeming incongruity, multiplicity and heterogeneity of human qualities have baffled you, remember that this is exactly how the print in all books and newspapers baffled you before you learned to read. Not long ago I was reading stories aloud to a 3-year-old. She wanted to see the pictures, and when told there were none, had to be shown the book. "What funny little marks," she cried, pointing to the print. "How do you get stories out of them?" Printing looked to all of us at first just masses of meaningless little marks. But after a few days at school, how things did begin to clear up. It wasn't a jumble after all. There was something to it. It straightened itself out until the funny little marks became significant. Each of them had a meaning, and the same meaning under all conditions. Through them your whole outlook on life became deepened and broadened, all because you learned the meaning of 26 little letters and their combinations. Reading people. Learning to read men and women is a more delightful process than learning to read books, for every person you see is a true story, more romantic and absorbing than any ever bound in covers. Learning people is a process than learning to read books, because there are fewer letters in the human alphabet, though man seems to the human emotion and every human thought. Thoughts bring actions. Now our actions follow our thought. Every thought, however transitory, causes muscular action which leaves its trace in that part of the physical organism which is most clearly allied to it. Physiology and psychology interwoven. Look into the mirror the next time you are angry, happy, surprised, tired, or sorrowful, and note the changes wrought by your emotions in your facial muscles. Constant repetition of the same kinds of thoughts or emotions finally make permanent changes in that part of the body which is physiologically related to these mental processes. The evolution of the jaw. The jaw is a good illustration of this alliance between the mind and the body. Its muscles and bones are so closely allied to the pugnacity instinct center in the brain that the slightest thought of combat causes the jaw muscles to stiffen. Let the thought of any actual physical encounter go through your mind, and your jawbone will automatically move upward and outward. After a lifetime of combat, whether by fists or words, the jaw is set permanently into a nature more upward and outward, a little more like that of a bulldog. It keeps to this combative mould because, says Mother Nature, the great efficiency expert, if you are going to call on me constantly to stiffen that jaw, I'll fix it so it will stay that way and save myself the trouble. Inheritance of acquired traits. Thus the more combative jaw, having become permanent in the man's organism, can be passed on to his children. Right here comes a most interesting law, and one that has made possible the science of human analysis. Law of size. The larger any part or organ, the better its equipment for carrying out the work of that organ, and the more does it tend to express itself. Nature is an efficiency expert, and doesn't give you an oversupply of anything without demanding that you use it. Jaws becoming smaller. Our ancestors developed massive jaws as a result of constant combat. As fast as civilization decreased the necessity for combat, nature decreased the size of the average human jaw. Meaning of the big jaw. But wherever you see a large protruding jaw, you see an individual, armed and engined, as Kipling says, for some kind of fighting. The large jaw always goes with a combative nature, whether it is found on a man or a woman, a child, a pugilist, or a minister. Exhibit A. The Irishman. The large jaw, therefore, is seen to be both a result and a cause of certain things. As the inheritance of a fighting ancestor, it is the result of millions of years of fighting in prehistoric times, and like any other overdeveloped part or organ, it has an intense urge to express itself. This inherent urge is what makes the owner of that jaw fight at the drop of a hat, and often have a chip on his shoulder. Natural selection. Thus, because every external characteristic is the result of natural laws, and chiefly of natural selection, the vital traits of any creature can be read from his externals. Every student of biology, anatomy, anthropology, ethnology, or psychology is familiar with these facts. Built to fit. Man's organism has developed, altered, improved, and evolved down through the slow revolving years, with one instinctive aim: successful reaction to its environment. Every part has been laboriously constructed to that sole end. Because of this, its functions are marked as clearly upon it as those of a grain elevator, a steamship, or a piano. Survival of the fittest. Nature has no accidents. She wastes no material, and everything has a purpose. If you put up a good fight to live, she will usually come to your rescue and give you enough of whatever is needed to tide you over. If you don't, she says you are not fit to people the earth, and lets you go without a pang. Thus she weeds out all but the strong, and evolution marches on. Causes of racial characteristics. This inherent potentiality for altering the organism to meet the demands of the environment is especially noticeable in races, and is the reason for most racial differences. Differences in environment, climate, altitude, and topography necessitated most of these physical differentiations, which today enable us to know at a glance whether a man belongs to the white race, the yellow race, or the black race. The results of these differentiations and modifications will be told in the various chapters of this book. Types earlier than races. The student of human analysis reads the disposition and nature of every individual with ease, regardless of whether that individual be an American, a Frenchman, a Kafir, or a Chinaman, because human analysis explains those fundamental traits which run through every race, colour, and nationality, according to the externals which go with those traits. 5 biological types. Human analysis differs from every other system of character analysis in that it classifies man for the first time into 5 types according to his biological evolution. It deals with man in the light of the most recent scientific discoveries. It estimates each individual according to his human qualities rather than his character or so-called moral qualities. In other words, it takes his measure as a human being and determines from his externals his chances for success in the world of today. These rules work. Every rule in this book is based on scientific data and has been proved to be accurate by investigation and surveys of all kinds of people in all parts of the world. These rules do not work merely part of the time. They work all the time, under all conditions, and apply to every individual of every race, every colour, every country, every community, and every family. Through this latest